And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and for today's video, for this week's video, we're going to talk a little bit about reading maps and reading map structure. Specifically, reading map structure of my DC New 52 reading map, which I know is something that I talked a little bit about last week, and obviously it's something I'm very much known for. But I thought some of the people that actually watch and listen to these videos might be interested in some of the thinking that went into making this structure the way it is. Specifically, this is aimed at some people that messaged after last week's video really nicely, but also curious, because they were asking how the structure of how many DC issue number ones there were kind of matched in with the fact that there were 52 issues, but 57 number one issues in which Pandora made a cameo. And suddenly those people are asking like why there were different number ones at different times and what they'd heard about these things about DC New 52 waves and how that all fitted in with this reading map. And so I thought, you know what, why not talk about it? Why not answer that question? So to start off with, this is my reading map. It's a radial reading map, which is pretty much the only radial or concentric reading map that I've done. I've got some interesting bits and pieces. I've been working on this in the background that I'll unveil over the coming weeks. But to start with, this is the reading map as it is. And the important thing to keep in mind is that this reading map is in no way influenced by what DC said the structure or the continuity was. And that's because DC structured and organised the continuity of the New 52 in the same way that any normal human company raised by humans would do, which is that they did their best they could at the time. But at the same time, you had lots of conflicting pressures. You had different managers, different editors, different directors, well, not directors, but writers and artists and so on. And they all had their own kind of agendas. And these things really only settled out in the wash years later. And to that end, I'm just going to show you what DC said the original structure was. So before we even get into the various waves that DC talked about, let's look at the DC New 52 and how it launched to start with, which was in this way. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. In September 2011, DC relaunched the entire New 52, and the plan was to keep 52 ongoing titles going at each time. As it turned out, later Dan Didio and Jim Lee, the two kind of chief execs, I suppose for want of a better term, of DC, kept pointing fingers at each other. Each of them said that the other one was obsessed with the number 52 and was adamant that there needed to be 52 ongoing titles. And what that meant is that if one of them got cancelled, then they'd immediately commission a new ongoing title on basically anything. Or they would try to fill that number in with one-shots or mini-series or maxi-series to make sure that each month you had 52 distinct titles being published. Did it sound arbitrary? Yes. Was it arbitrary? Yes. So with that intention to publish 52 ongoing titles each month, that's obviously conflicting with reality, with writers that are running late, artists that are missing deadline, people who simply aren't producing popular comics or comics that aren't getting the markets that they should be getting and therefore are getting cancelled. And so trying to shore that up meant just like padding it out with loads of random stuff. We'll get to that in a second, but the first thing to think about is that when DC first launched this, after Flashpoint, they talked about the fact that there were 7 families of comics. Now you may recognise this sequence actually from my reading map, because I don't start with Batman. I start with, as the first set of comics that I go into, as Justice League. And the way that DC arranged it, they said the families were Justice League, Batman, Superman, Green Lantern. Then they called it Young Justice, The Edge, and The Dark. Now I split these up a little bit further. I have Justice League, Batman, Superman, Lanterns in general, The Young, as I called it, concluding everything to do with Young Justice and just underage or younger than adult superheroes. I did keep The Edge and The Dark, but I also split out things like The New Storm and The Goofy and things like that. So as a result, my particular grouping turned into over a dozen different families, which frankly I stand by and I think makes sense. That said, I can't blame DC for thinking that they were just going to hold true to 7 distinct families when they launched. Over 5 years, they drifted from that. As part of that, it's worth noting that they released a total of 111 distinct different titles during the New 52. By distinct different titles, I mean like ongoing titles, or at least titles that were intended to be ongoing. As well as that, they released 34 one-shots, 32 miniseries, and 4 maxi-series. Full disclosure, I got these numbers of Wikipedia. I haven't actually gone into my library and counted them all. I will do that for a future more detailed project for the New 52 that I'm working on. But for now, as a rough ballpark, these numbers of Wikipedia look roughly right to me. But they also give you an idea of how many titles got cancelled during this period and how many times the DC management decided to try to shore it up by just filling in some one-shots and some mini-series to keep on hitting that magical 52 series a month number. So that's the thing about DC families, which is how they originally said they were going to arrange the New 52. But pretty much from day one, almost out of the gate, they started talking about different waves of comics. And in fact, there are 10 waves of DC comics showing the New 52. And we're going to look at them now. Wave 1 was like this. Justice League was the very first one to launch. I've got this list both alphabetically but chronologically as well, as best I can. So you've got Justice League, Action Comics, Animal Man, Batgirls. It's worth keeping in mind that Batman wasn't the very first thing to come out in Wave 1. Then you've got Batwing, Detective Comics, Green Arrow. The list goes on. Men of War, OMAC, of course. Batman and Robin and Batwoman are here. These are all in Wave 1, keep in mind. You have Mr. Terrific, which as we now know is part of the Earth 2 continuity. But here it is as part of Wave 1. And then of course Nightwing and Red Hood, All-Star Western. We then had Batman the Dark Knight come out a couple of weeks into Wave 1. Keep in mind, when I say Wave 1, I mean that first month of publication. All of Wave 1 and all of the subsequent waves all came out in round about the same month. And with this you've got Flash, Firestorm, iVampire, Superman by Morrison. So these were all of the Wave 1 issues. And so these are all the issue 1s that we were looking at. Pandora can be found in every single one of these. However, she can also be found in every issue of Wave 2. Now Wave 2 has got Dial H, Earth 2, GI Combat, World's Finest, Batman Incorporated and Ravagers. Earth 2, as I mentioned in last week's video, is the only one of these issues where she was going to feature and then they decided, oh, actually we think this is a separate reality, an alternate reality, so we're not going to have Pandora in it. So they removed it from that at the last minute. But other than that, Pandora is visible in every single issue 1 of all of the first wave and all of the second wave. But then, understandably, people messaged me and they were like, well, what about the stuff we heard about there being a third wave and other stuff like that? So, within that, oh, here we are. Third wave, we have the Phantom Stranger, Team 7, Sword of Sorcery and Talon. Now, the way the third wave came into being was because 4 series from the second wave got cancelled and they got replaced. Similarly, a few months later, you then had the fourth wave, where these 6 series came into place because 6 things from the third wave, or from the preceding 3 waves, was then cancelled. The 5th wave is here with the Movement and Green Team, both by Gail Simone, The Amazing Superman Unchained, Laughley's Batman and Superman, and Trinity of Sin Pandora, again featuring Pandora. These had issues 1s, but these were a good couple of years into the New 52, so at this point these didn't have Pandora cameos, and these were this new series as part of a 5th wave or a 5th pulse of DC releases. As a 6th wave, we then had Superman Wonder Woman, because at this point Superman and Wonder Woman had become romantically involved in the respective series for themselves. We also had Harley Quinn Volume 2 and Justice League 3000, which is one of my goofy comics. Moving over to Wave 7. So the 7th wave involved quite a few things launching, and the reason for this is the 7th wave came after Convergence. Now, because it came after Convergence, a lot of series ended at Convergence. So, for example, Nightwing ended at that point with Grayson. Sorry, I say Convergence. No, I don't mean Convergence. I mean Forever Evil. But Nightwing ended after Forever Evil, and you then had the Grayson series start. But the whole point is that all of these things started in that period, kind of post Forever Evil. But that's not the best time to read them. Aquaman and the Others really needs to be read much earlier in the Aquaman series, and so on and so forth. But anyway, this is the 7th wave, and this is how the 7th wave is sort of organised or released by DC. We also have stuff that's completely out of continuity, like the multiversity and things like that, which basically have no bearing whatsoever on the New 52 or are parts of my out of continuity grouping. Moving on to the 8th wave, we've got Gotham by Midnight and Secret 6. The 9th wave is post-convergence. This is what I meant by post-convergence, sorry, not the 7th wave. And for this, you have a whole bunch of random things that are sort of spinning out into what they call DCU, which was a kind of a relabeling or re-imprinting of a lot of ongoing DC New 52 series. So this way you see a lot of changes in a lot of the series. So for example, in Batman, you see the advent of the bunny Batman. With Superman, you see the spines going from black to, oddly enough, kind of like a bubblegum blue colour instead of red. You see Red Hood and the Outlaws become Red Hood Arsenal. You see Birds of Prey become Black Canary. All these sorts of things are really interesting kind of evolutions or shifts in terms of what was going on with DC Comics at the time, and it all represents that final year, the DCU year. And finally, 10th wave, we've got these post-convergence issues. Now, Telos actually is a series that spins directly out of Convergence. Batman and Robin Eternal spins directly out of Batman and Robin. Superman, Lois and Clark actually has a sequel series that is released several years later, right in the depth of DC Rebirth. I never actually covered it in my map, but I will do, and I will add it to my map, and I will re-release that as I'm planning on doing very soon. There's also a few other standalones like Superman American Alien, Batman Europa, which really is out of continuity, The Coming of the Supermen, which is definitely out of continuity, as is Bloodlines. But as you can see, this is the 10th wave there. So the reason that I didn't go with the wave kind of mechanism or structure outlined by DC is that it just wasn't very helpful. It groups things that are not in continuity with things that are in continuity, and it doesn't really tell you what links on from what. It doesn't tell you that, for example, Harley Quinn and Power Girl links in at a particular point of the Harley Quinn series. It doesn't tell you that Robin, Son of Batman comes after Batman and Robin or things like that. There's still a lot of joining up and connective tissue to sort of add together to make it work. So this approach of using different waves, as you can see here, wasn't really massively helpful. It didn't really answer my questions. So I'm just scrolling back up here, and then if you get to the 4th wave, and the 3rd wave, and indeed the 2nd wave. So this is why it's structured in terms of waves. For those that are curious, Batman is just here. Batman Volume 2, it was in Wave 1, but it was released chronologically a couple of weeks in, whilst all this is kind of, well, the very first issue on the very first week and the very first wave of DC New 52 is Justice League, and then, you know, handfuls of them released every week after that. But yeah, in terms of this, you've got Wave 1 here, and you know there are 10 waves of these. You can group them in that way, but it's not a helpful way to do it. I personally don't feel so, and so I didn't want to use this at all when I was making my guide. Scrolling right back up to the top, the idea of grouping it into different families was much more useful, and I did use stuff like the Edge and the Dark, and I created ideas like the Goofy and the New Storm and the Young to kind of make that work, and I think that is a good way to do it. But as a result, that's why I grouped my reading map the way that I did. And for those of you that were wondering, again, like I say, why there were 57 #1 issues with Pandora in, even though there were only ever 52 ongoing titles each month, well, that's the reason why. She wasn't literally out the gate on the very first day at the start of the very first month, but she was in every single issue of the first 2 waves, barring, let's just zoom out here, barring Earth 2. And there we are. Well, on that note, I think I've probably broken it. That's disturbing. Oh, there we are. There we are. This is my map. Huge and ridiculously large though it is. There we go. And so that's why I did this by section. As I've kind of let the cat out of the bag, I might as well just point out that what I've done is one of the things I did over the last few months. I rebuilt this entire map, and I've rebuilt it into the live zooming software, which is elsewhere on my website. If you are interested, go on my website, have a look at some of my other DC guides, you'll see what I mean. I built it in a live, high resolution, scalable, infinitely scalable bit of software, which means that it's going to be editable. And so I can tweak it and make various changes. In fact, I've added a few slight corrections to it. So for example, these yellow circles here should be joined up with a line, but they're not. And there's a few things like that that I've done, and I will be re-releasing that and put on the website in the next couple of weeks. But that's something for next week's conversation, depending on what I decide to talk about next week. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was useful. Please let me know your thoughts. And as always, until the next time, everyone, stay classy.